Hi, this is Lisa Klein, and we're here with Dr. Michael Radkowsky for another edition of our little pandemic-initiated TV program. We decided to do a fun show today about something that's near and dear to everybody's hearts, which is the Netflix hit show Bridgerton. And we decided to do an analysis of it from the perspective of a psychologist who works with trauma and couples, right, which is kind of hysterical, and a trauma-informed physical therapist who has a lot of opinions, being that I'm from New York. So there we are. Hi, Michael.
Hi, I'm so excited to discuss Bridgerton, which you urged me to watch.
I did. That's true. I said I really liked it, and then you watched it.
Yes.
And then when you were able to process the graphicness of it, then we went into the rest of it. And we had a conversation about how it was an extremely interesting example of inner child trauma healing that led to a successful relationship, as far as we know, although it's only a year in and they had the baby. So, Michael, why don't you take it away there?
Well, underneath the veneer of smut was a really fascinating show, although many people enjoyed the veneer of smut.
A good veneer of, it's a pandemic, Michael. You know, a good veneer of smut is appreciated. We'll take it any way we can right now.
I also enjoyed the tea scenes with all of those scones and multicolored cakes that made me want to go out to have tea somewhere.
I'm sure you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beyond all that, there was a fascinating story that was very moving about how trauma is so destructive. I'm thinking of poor little Simon, who grew up to become the Duke, who lost his mom when she was giving birth to him and grew up with this hateful father. Thank goodness he had some loving companionship in the form of, sorry about that, in the form of that lovely Duchess. I'm not sure what her name was.
Danbury, right? She was Danbury.
Yes. And some very, very caring household help.
Yeah.
Because let me start that sentence again. Little children need to feel like they're the apple of their parents' eye, meaning really love to grow up healthy and feeling good about themselves. And alas, Simon certainly did not get that from his father. He got the opposite, but it was a mitigating power of love that he got from the Duchess of Danbury and
the older lady. Yeah.
The very caring household help. So I think that's why he was able to function at all and have any ability to connect with other people. But his father sure did a terrible number on him.
So it's the mirroring, right? People need that mirroring of, because I see it with your little boy all the time. You know, they're always, you know, look at me, look at me, look at me. They need endless, infinite, you're awesome, you're awesome. You know, they need that. They develop a construct about their own worth by how they are handled by the people around them. Is that true?
Yes, they learn to love themselves by feeling love. And yeah, I noticed that too. When he has some achievement, he looks at us to see if we recognize it, that he can feel better about himself. We learn to feel good about ourselves by having our parents or primary caregivers see our value. And when they're not doing it, if someone's doing it, that's still a lot better than nothing if we're getting it somewhere.
So that's what I know Pia Melody in her Precious Child series that I listened to was so profound, talked about how the parents are there to teach you how to do it, like what to do and how to do it. You know, how does the world work? So little children rely on the people around them. What are colors? What are every single little thing they're learning. And so I was asking, I was like, you feel like you're discovering the world again through the eyes of this baby? It's pretty profound because everything is new for the first time. But at the same thing, it's like, who am I? And what am I? Am I good? Am I bad? You know, and your nervous system grows based on how it's molded by the people around you. Is that fair to say?
And not only feeling loved, but feeling safe, which goes hand in hand with feeling loved. We're hardwired, many people say, to depend on our caregivers to keep us safe. That just makes sense. I'm sure it's true. And when they're not doing that, it's profoundly scary, and we really can't feel safe in the world. Fortunately, these things are somewhat remediable with a lot of hard work. It's possible to repair all of this stuff, which I think is what those wonderful last episodes of Bridgerton tackled.
Well,
with no therapists.
That's shocking. She didn't have any therapy, but well, she did because her mother was really good. But just to circle back, so one of the things that you and I talked about was how interesting it is that psychologically you become your belief systems, your thoughts and feelings, all these things are molded by what's happening around you in the same way that your body, because we work with trauma, but also obviously physical trauma, the nervous system does the same thing. So if you have trauma when you're young, physically, and it's not reset, your whole body starts to become revolving around that trauma. So nerves are nerves, it all works the same way. So in as much as, you can heal from physical trauma, you can also heal from the effects of conditioning that are very negative. And can you speak to the fact that, again, the repetition, so you had this very mean guy, the father, and this poor little boy had a speech impediment, maybe because his father was so awful. And, who knows? We can blame everything on our fathers, can't we? No, I'm just kidding. So, just kidding. So, but that poor little boy, speech impediments can be from anxiety and from trauma. So you have this poor little boy, who knows, and who can't really speak, and the father just eviscerates him about it. It's horrific to watch. It's really sad.
Yeah, so, he wouldn't even open his letters. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that like a perfectionism that the father had, that he couldn't handle a flaw in his son, even though he desperately wanted a son?
So it seemed. Yeah, that's what I think he actually said in a flashback.
Okay.
He was just a terrible person. And to state the obvious, wow, it's not our children's job to be who we want them to be. That's another message, I think, of this very interesting series, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting thing that I hadn't thought about, because the whole show is about people, come to think of it, is about people living according to these very rigid norms and expectations and how you have to do everything. So maybe there's a very subtle subtext here about that disappointment and imperfection are just part of life and absolutely fine. We don't get to dictate how other people do things.
Well, that was a very rigid society. So you think about the women, like the girl Eloise, who really she didn't want to get married. She wants to get a job, and then you have Penelope. And so the ones who are actually breaking out of the female mold a little bit, to be like, what do you mean I have to dress up like a doll and have some dude, become his property or whatever? I think the women were just like, do I really have to do that? So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know if I told you this, but Eloise, I hope listeners have seen this fine productions that we're talking about, but she seemed like she was a different show to me. She was so different from everyone else.
I know. She really, really was.
Yeah. A different century, not just a different show. She seemed very modern.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the mother. I thought she was wonderful. And you could almost think that maybe she'd worked as a therapist before she got married or something. She was very down to earth, despite being
time
very
period. The therapists were women who had 6 kids who had lost their husbands tragically. They're the ones who went into the role of the therapist.
Well, she was quite wise.
She really was. Although she kind of saw what was happening, as did Danbury, that the two of them really did love each other, even though they had this ruse they were perpetuating.
Yeah.
She had a lot of insights into her daughter, but. So let's talk about, the main scene that I was so touched by that we started talking about was when the Duchess and whatever, the Duke, they're in the garden party after it rained, and she's laughing and just pours her heart out just to say, she feels like she now understands him, and says that, I get that your father rejected you because he felt you were imperfect, but I love you. You know, I love even your imperfections. And, you know, if you let it in, my love could wash all the rest of it away. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a little simplistic, but a beautiful sentiment with some truth in it. I don't think that love can wash everything else away. I don't think trauma just evaporates like that.
Not really?
But I think it can be very healing.
Michael. Okay.
Are you really disappointed to hear me say that?
Well, because what was interesting was the next scene, he's like, okay, but I don't know how to do it. So I think he realized that he didn't know how to be loved. He didn't know how to love her. He didn't know how to be, you know, the man that she needed him to be. So okay, so would you say, because I've seen this with my patients, and again, we're physical therapists, we do a ton of mind body work, but in the physical piece. But what we see is that, you know, when you have trauma, part of it is it changes your idea about yourself, that you're not lovable, basically. And I think you have to make the decision to reject that and say, well, wait a minute, maybe I am lovable, and let somebody love you.
There's many levels you could see this on. I know a wonderful quote. The traumatized brain is poised for battle. And you could say that Simon was in that situation. So you have to be willing to put down your armor and allow yourself to be vulnerable, which is exactly the truth of any relationship. You can't have a close relationship without being vulnerable, which is a lot of people think that's unfortunate, right? Because you have to be willing to be hurt and accept pain. But that's just the way it is. You can't get close to someone if you're not going to be vulnerable, if you're going to have your guard up. So that's one thing I think Simon had to learn. But
so that's like that. Oh, sorry. That's like that fight or flight. That's like the fight or flight reaction. So if you've seen our other videos, so one of the first things that happens when you're under stress is that your adrenals will load and you go into this fight or flight reaction. So that's a sign that your system's a little bit loaded. So yeah, so if you're fighting or fleeing, which is what he was doing, right? They were going to split up. So that's like a flight situation. And then when he finally kind of wound around, he kind of went into a freeze response. He's like, I don't know what to do. So that's more of a freeze kind of situation. But we would say that if that goes on for a long time, then the limbic system goes into a survival reaction, and then it becomes part of your MO. It's part of what you do, probably not even realizing it.
Yeah, you really have to have some good ways of soothing yourself to override the shutdown. This would be a great place for a plug of a book I'm reading called Polybagel Exercises for Safety and Connection.
I love that.
Which sounds like a mouthful for anyone who's never heard of polyvagal theory, as most of us haven't. But all it means is that the vagus nerve goes through our whole body and has a lot to do with fight, flight, freeze. And there are things that we can do to help it relax from a little bit to way more than a little bit to help us through difficult situations like that.
Yeah. So I had a patient the other day who I'm treating her. I have my hands on her and she's in a freeze response. You could feel it. And she's an adult woman. She has a job. She's functional, but she became overwhelmed and she went into freeze. And she's working with a therapist. You know, I'm not a therapist, nor do I pretend I am. But so I'm like, okay, well, what are some things you could do right now to solve this situation? Like, let's make a list. And it was interesting just watching her body shift as she's like, oh, I could do this. I could do this. I could do this. It kind of brought her out of that freeze state, which was kind of helpful because again, like unconsciously, subconsciously, her pattern was to become overwhelmed and then go into a freeze mode, which is again, is a very disempowered state of being. And her emotional adult was kind of MIA. So I kind of felt like Simon was in that space when he went to her afterwards and he's like, I don't know even what to do to be the man you want me to be and need me to be. She's like, we'll figure it out together, which I thought was really profound. I mean, I give them a lot of credit in this made up TV show, but about how they, you know, they'd fight, but they come back together and then they'd fight, they come back together. And she's like,
Mhm.
what's going on here? What is going on? You lied to me, you did all these terrible things, but I kind of love you. So let's see if we can figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I was very impressed with her capacity to stay with him and not give up. It's very easy to become angry and retaliatory after all the terrible things that you listed that he did to her. You could see her just bolting, forget about it, I'm going to get a good settlement and be on my way, although it would have been a difficult life for her, I think, afterward.
Yeah.
But I was still impressed with her to be able to hang in there. And that's what we need to do. Can we talk about the mother's comment to her, which was one of the most profound things in the series, I thought, where she said, you have to choose to love every day. Is that right? She's the mother of Daphne, is
Like that,
reminiscing
yeah.
about her own marriage and how it had its ups and downs. And she said, every day, I'm paraphrasing, we had to choose to love each other. And I think that's wise for all of our listeners. I hope there are, of course, tens of thousands of them. There are always going to be things that will profoundly disappoint us at times about our spouses.
I lost your video.
I'm coming back. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Here I am. I got a blip that I'm in low power mode, but I'm sure I have enough to finish today. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Is there any way to edit that out?
That's beyond my technical capacity.
Okay. So the mother says we have to choose to love every day, and there are always going to be things that will disappoint us in our spouses at times, and vice versa will disappoint them. And you really have to choose to love the other person in spite of those things is not quite the right word. And those things are true. And I still love that person because that's life.
Yeah.
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 So she hung in there and she helped Simon, feel some safety and desire to work on himself. It still was up to him, right? But it helps to have someone loving and supporting you.
Well, I think it was good because he had Danbury also, who was just like, are you the biggest idiot ever? Like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
not, so, which was helpful. But I feel like, it's kind of like how to learn between what your body is telling you, what your emotions are telling you, and what your mind is telling you. And our bodies can be in one realm, and then our emotions could be all over the place in a whole nother area. And then your mind has to be like, okay, let's really put this together. And I think that from the trauma theory that we follow also is that when you're in a trauma brain, your brain gets hijacked by the limbic system, which is irrational. So part of it is to see, okay, what am I doing? I mean, that's why Danbury was almost just like, wake up, like, look what you're doing. Like, you're letting your emotions hijack this woman and she loves you, like, come on, snap out of it. So it was just absolutely fascinating how his rational mind, and then they were able to get their emotions under control in a way where it was like, okay, let's just take a moment here.
Yeah. So can I come at this from a slightly different angle for people who wonder, what do you do when you're really traumatized?
Sure.
To avoid shutting down and falling the way that you want to live, a couple of things. One is that you have to, we do have power over how we act. And I think that getting clear about what we hold most dear can help us to behave in a way that might be scary, but we feel is the best path for us. Right? So is it most dear for Simon to hold on to his grudge against his malicious father who is no longer alive? Obviously no, in the end, fortunately, for the story of that couple. Or was it most important to him to honor himself, allow him to become a father, have a happy marriage? Fortunately, that's what he chose, right?
I
but
think that
keeping
goes
in
back to
mind,
rational thought. Yeah.
It's rational thought, but also knowing that there's a meaning to your suffering that's important to you can help you to endure the suffering is one way to think about it, right? So if you could keep in mind that it's important for him to have a good life and provide his wife with a good life and, have a family and all that, that could help him to get through the difficulty of allowing himself to be close.
Yeah.
Come to
And
think of it,
allowing that
yeah.
vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was beautiful. I thought that the way that it was done was very profound, and I didn't see that coming at all. You know, it's a lot of jewelry and clothing and sex, and it's great. And I really was surprised at that scene and how profound it was. And
Yes. And it, go ahead.
I mean, I feel like it was written by people who knew a lot about trauma, and
Yeah.
how, you know, this little poor little guy was so broken by his father, you know, but even with the abuse that he suffered, again, he had no mother. Thank God he had Danbury, and
Hmm.
he grew up on his own pretty much, poor little thing. But in the end, he allowed himself to be loved by Daphne. I thought it was very, very profound.
Yes. Yeah. Pretty much the only human emotion you saw in that series otherwise was a lot of maliciousness, right? And falseness.
Yep.
And so, as you said, to see some real heart in the show.
Yeah. You want to talk about Penelope now? Is that your entryway into
Yeah.
Penelope?
Well, you have to wonder what happened to her that she would be the person that she was.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe there's a softer side to her explanation for why she would carry on the way she did, but she was quite, I thought, a malicious character. Not just what she did with revealing the pregnancy of her relative, and interrupting that marriage possibility. Well, maybe in some ways that was a decent thing to do in some ways, right? That she was going to trick this guy into the marriage, young Master Bridgerton.
True. Yeah.
But she was also keeping everyone terrorized by her gossipy writings.
Well, if you think about how she was treated by her mother,
it's not the nicest way to be.
Yeah, she was treated horrible. I mean, she was like a Cinderella situation. She had these two sisters who were really mean to her. It seemed to be.
Yeah.
And then she, you know, she was a really beautiful girl and very talented and smart, but she was the one who was overweight, and they gave her a hard time about it, I'm sure, all the time. So, you know,
yeah,
well, they weren't very nice to her at all.
I agree. Yeah.
You know, not good. So maybe she was upset about that.
It reminds me a little bit of there's this wonderful movie called The Heiress, which is based on a play called The Heiress, which I think is based on a short book called Washington Square, about a spinster who grows up in her father's. She's quite plain. Her father's very mean to her. And then he lets her know the truth about her boyfriend. It's that he's just interested in her money. And then she becomes a very heartless person at the end of the movie and the play. And her aunt says, "How could you be so cruel?" And she says to her aunt, "I have learned from masters." It's a great movie. It's with Olivia de Havilland. I think she won one of her Academy Awards for it. And it's called The Heiress. But it's also true of Penelope. She learned from masters to be cruel, perhaps.
Which is, you know, that's kind of how the Duke
How's that for a great literary reference?
That was a fantastic
That's kind of how the Duke was?
Well, the Duke was pretty cruel.
You're right,
he
you're
lied
right,
to her
yeah.
about not, you know, technically he did. And he was cruel. You know, he's never going to get married, the whole 9 yards. And, you know, the fact that then he softened, but poor Penelope, you know, she's in love with Colin, and he doesn't see her.
Yeah.
You know, so she, you know, is not in the same situation, unfortunately. And she's gotten very bitter. But she's getting it from all sides.
Yeah.
She's getting it from her mother. She's getting it from her sisters, her father, who is apparently, you know, a near-do-well, whatever you want to call it, lose all their money gambling, loses his life. So they've got some stuff in there. She doesn't have, it sounds like she doesn't have anybody except Eloise who really, like, you know, loves her. So she doesn't have a Danbury.
And then look how she pushed Eloise away at one point.
Yeah.
Or was it Eloise who pushed her away? Was it in both directions? I think she pushed Eloise away, right?
I remember.
Yeah. Hey, can I say one more thing about Simon and Daphne?
Sure.
They have a really happy ending, but you could have said to Daphne, I mean, it might not have worked out, obviously, and obviously this whole thing never happened, but things like this do happen in real life. And I always tell people that, I wonder what you think of this, you can't count on the other person changing the ways you want them to change. You have to go to live with them as they are. In this case, he did change in a really positive way. That does happen, but you can't count on it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I think the fact that they were already married, you know, if this is a situation where you're just dating somebody and you're not married in a way that now it's a society, you're a duke and a duchess and this whole thing. If you're just dating someone who doesn't seem like they're going to let you in, what do? You don't want to keep knocking your head against the wall. And it's like, okay, you know, we have therapy now, you know, and there's no excuse of like, well, I don't know how to deal with my trauma. It's like, no, like your therapy is all online. Like you have resources now. You don't have that excuse. So if you are dating someone who is a Simon and doesn't seem like they're letting you in, what do you do, Michael? And you're not married.
You can't count on the other person changing.
No.
Right? You can't push someone either. You can advocate for what you'd like. You could suggest that they do the work, but you really can't push too hard, right? For one thing, it gives them someone to push against rather than having to confront themselves.
Yeah.
Many of us have learned this the hard way. So, right? I hope those of you who are listening will hear the message. You can't change someone else, and you can't push too hard either. It's up to them. You know, when you push them, then they have someone to argue with rather than taking a look at what their own problem is.
Yeah.
So maybe time to move on.
So I think in that construct, well, I think it's interesting because they were already married. They have a whole society working around. They're already in a box. They can't get divorced. So in that case, Daphne's like, well, either I'm going to have a miserable life or I can try and see what's happening here. So she was the one who really did all the work, which is fine. And then he opened up, which is totally fine. So, yeah, I mean, but I feel like in this day and age, we're not in those situations really. So if you're, you know, meeting somebody on Bumble and it turns out like, that they don't really seem like they're very open, you know, what do you can't, you don't stay, I don't think. I mean, you have to be like, all right, you know, I don't know. What do you, I mean, yeah, right?
Don't count on them changing the way you'd like them to change.
Exactly.
Yeah. And ask yourself why you might be so attracted to someone who is fixer-upper. Yeah.
Simony, like a little broken bird. I mean, I think the sad part about it is that there's a lot of people in that category. So my mentor said one thing to me one day. She said most relationships break up because of limbic transference, where, you know, people are stuck in these survival ways of behaving and you're projecting and transferring things that happened to you as a child on now the person who you're dating. And I see this all the time in my, like, you know, people kind of come at you in a way you're like, what? You know, when things happen that are irrational or they don't make any sense, the person's kind of replaying their childhood dynamic. That could be the case, right?
Yeah.
With projection.
That's very well said. Yeah. So I want to plug in, I'm so sorry about this technically. I'm going to plug in my phone so I don't disappear again. Hang on.
Okay.
The power cord reaches.
Well, that was nice and fast.
Fingers crossed that the cord's long enough, and it is. Come on. Okay.
There you go.
We're all set. So,
Great.
That's a very profound statement, I think, that your mentor said. Most people break up because of limbic.
Like projection or
difficulties. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're reacting to a situation. Okay. So how I was taught, again, in my limited mind body training, was when you've had trauma growing up, your limbic system, which is simple mediated, it's not rational. If you find yourself in a situation that feels similar, you will go into these protective responses and you'll start reacting towards someone who's actually safe as if they're not. So you start, you know, this is like projection and transference. So it's like, you know, this is my lovely friend, Michael. And if something else, like, Michael, you know, so I would respond to you in a way that has no bearing on really the situation in terms of reality or Michael as a person, because he's my friend. Yeah. So like, that's kind of how the Duke was acting towards Daphne. He was treating her as if she was his abusive father. And she's like, all I want to do is love you.
Yeah.
And his brain was like, no, I'm treating you as if you are abusing me, which she was not.
Yes, I know another great statement which says the same thing. I think you'll love this. Maybe I've said it on a previous show. If it's hysterical, it's historical.
I
Have I
think
said
about
that?
that all the time. You said that to me years ago, and I thought it was so brilliant because, yeah, because I feel like it's very common where people get into these. I see it in friendships, I see it in romantic relationships where people have these reactions. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's
Yeah.
not the situation. And, you know, you can see it in yourself as if I find myself getting that upset, I'm like, okay, what is this really about? Because it's probably
Yeah.
not about the current situation.
Yeah. My brilliant teacher, Noel Larson, taught it to me. If it's hysterical, it's historical. And it's usually true. If you have a big reaction to something, it has its roots in your history.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what
Fascinating.
else is there to say about that magnificent production?
I thought it was, I was really affected by it. I thought it was very well done. And again, I love that it all came down to the power of love. So would you say though, because you do say that, you know, in relationships, it's not about unconditional love, but she was, well, she wasn't really saying that because she called him on his behavior when he wasn't being loving to her. But she was saying,
Yeah.
I love you even with all of your faults.
Yeah. Well, again, I'll say it again. I thought that that was profound, and she really hung in there. You pointed out she really had nowhere to go. They could have had separate lives, but she didn't want to give up. I suppose another marriage would have been difficult for her, so she was facing the rest of her life to live with someone just married to them in name only with no real relationship, and that seemed unappealing. But it's a lot to, you know, when you've been hurt as she was, to hold on to your love and remember the things you love about the person, be able to understand their trauma history, which was another great element, right? She read the letters, she could understand how mean his father had been to him. That was very helpful for this whole situation, that she could understand what he'd been through and be able to hang in there. I'll say something about that. That's one of the wonderful things about couples therapy, is that people hear each other's story and they can understand why the other person is acting the way they are and realize that it's not always, perhaps not even often, about them, right? The other person has their own story contributing to why they are behaving the way they are behaving. And once you know that, it doesn't hurt as much, I think, right? You don't take it so
Well, it
personally.
takes the edge off. It may, you know, it's like, So isn't that then the difference? There's a difference between unconditional loving someone, which is loving them for all their faults, but also not putting up with bad behavior. You know, she, even though she loved him, she called him on the fact that he lied to her.
Yeah.
So unconditional loving someone is not about being abused and letting them walk all over you. And, you know, there's a boundary there of, you know, you lied to me and I'm not okay with that. I love you, but you lied to me and I'm not okay with that. So we can talk about that. I think that's a fine line that's hard for people sometimes.
And also, sometimes behavior can erode love, right? Love may not survive bad behavior.
That's true.
A lot of times people say, you know, they're much nicer to friends, or not even friends, than they are their closest, you know, intimate partners. They can be really mean. And they say, well, that's unconditional love. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't be treating people you love badly. Love can be fragile, I think.
I wonder if the sex had not been so good, would she have stayed? I'm just saying. They seem to have a very strong chemical connection that was played out all over that house.
Over and
all
over
again. That house
and
the yard and the gazebo. So I don't know. I mean,
and their other house in London.
And their other houses. So I wonder.
Was there a scene in a stagecoach?
So I wonder if they had that going for them. I don't know. I mean, they seem to be very into each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that helped. It's a good thing they were two decent people, because a lot of times that can get you in trouble, right? Having a really strong sexual connection with someone, but you may not have a great relationship otherwise. Now, I just opened up a giant topic, which I don't really want to get into, because even if you have a bad relationship, I think they are often improvable, right? Because people are improvable.
Yeah.
But a great sex life alone does not make for a great relationship. Maybe
I think
that's
they're
what I
also
should say.
friends too. Yeah. Cause they, I know, just cut you off. So when they first got together, they had this friendship, and she was his friend's sister. So, it was this, they had a friendship, they had history, and they got along.
Mm-hmm.
I think he made a comment about how, she didn't get on his nerves, or he liked listening to her talk or something like that. So, he liked her as a person, and they had a good sex situation, and, she really loved him. So.
Now, speaking of her brother, what's his problem? I didn't see one likable thing about him in the entire series.
Which brother? Are you talking about Colin,
The
or
oldest
the older
one.
brother, the one who was
older
having
brother.
sex with the prostitute, or was she an escort?
She was an opera singer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. But he had this relationship with her, and he's like, but she was like, this isn't going to go anywhere. This is a childish fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, he's like, love sucks. He had some issues there, I think.
He was full of issues. He was negative throughout the entire series.
But he was the oldest son, and the father died. So sometimes doesn't all that fall on the oldest son in that way? So he may have been in a situation that's way above his wheelhouse from a young age. Yeah. Maybe that took a toll on him.
Yeah. So his way of handling it was to handle it the way he handled it, all full of bluff and Yeah.
So that's trauma.
Yeah, very poorly.
Because then it was him, and then the other son, who was then dating the modiste.
Oh, I love the modiste. Yes, I love her.
He's not going to end up with that modiste. Has he learned nothing from his brother, who was dating the opera singer? You can't marry the modiste.
Well, maybe they'll change things. A lot of things changed in that world, right?
And then the other one goes off on his, year abroad or whatever. He gets to go away.
Yeah. The one who was going to marry
Colin.
That lovely young woman who was pregnant, whose name I can't remember now.
Can we talk about the utter lack of sex education in that time period, by the way? Like, these women have no idea how babies are made, apparently. Like, they didn't have any idea how babies are made. How's that even possible?
Yeah, why is that?
I don't know. And then even the mother, like Daphne, had no idea. She had to ask her hand person, her servant.
That was a very funny scene where the mother was trying to explain things to her in a very, very indirect way. Was it embarrassment to talk about things like that?
I don't know, but I was happy that Daphne gave her a piece of her mind and says, if you told me the truth, I wouldn't be in this pickle, because I would have understood from the beginning.
But the mother was also, since we're letting everyone off the hook with their trauma histories, right? Maybe this is a trauma history, but the mother was also the product of her world, right? She learned how to be and what to talk about herself. It's how these things change. There just has to be enough critical mass of people saying, I don't want to live like this, to stand up to certain constraints and change, right? What do you think?
But it's also, you have a thing around sex where it's all the proper ladies don't have sex. Mm-hmm. And so their husbands, as was stated to Daphne, like, take away their whateverness, it's almost like violent. And then, but the guys are all having sex with all these women at all these parties. It's like, what the hell? How's that fair?
It's a terrible double standard.
It's ridiculous. These women are held to a standard where they can only have sex with their husbands, and only once they're married, which involves giving the guy a dowry. By the way, you're paying him to marry this woman, like he's making a big sacrifice. It's disgusting. And then anyway.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah, listen, if you watch that, we're ranging a little far afield, but I watched this great, hello everyone, I watched this great documentary about Mae West the other day. She was a fascinating person, which led me to watch an interview of her, I think with Dick Cavett, and he said, let's talk about this play you wrote back in the 1920s. It had a very simple title, and she replied very interestingly. The play was called Sex, and she said, it's not such a simple title. She said, it's just one word, but it's not simple. I thought that was profound.
It is very
And so,
profound.
yeah.
If you think about all the
yeah.
ways that women have been kept, in servitude and by really weaponizing sexuality, but on both sides. So
Yeah.
interesting.
It is interesting. A force that, what's it about? Procreation, love, so complicated and causes so much, can be so destructive also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
But in this case of Bridgerton, it was used for good because that's it off together.
Yes, I'm very happy last scene where they have a baby.
Yeah.
Was very, very sweet. Yes. So I wonder what will happen in season 2. I heard it's going to focus on that dreadful elder brother.
Yeah, I heard. So what I heard is, it's 7 books and each one's a different of the children. So this was on Daphne and I think, and then I don't know, maybe the brother. So
the Eloise series would, I think, be very interesting.
Yeah, I think she'd be good.
Yeah. And a show about Penelope also.
I wonder what's going to happen with them, those poor.
We'll have to wait and see, or read the book, right?
Exactly. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was fascinating.
Yes, it was really fun to talk about. And I hope that our listeners enjoyed our talk. It was so much fun. It's always great to talk with you. We always have a lot, in our view, interesting things to say, right?
Well, to us, it's fascinating. Let's be honest.
Yes,
we think this whole thing is fascinating. But I think there's so much, again, overlap between what you do psychologically and then what we do physically. And I'm always amazed by that, about how the physical body and the psychology really do very similar things when they're stressed and traumatized. And I'm honored to be part of this community of people in DC, and I'm sure many other places, who are at this level of expertise that we can make a difference in that, which is wonderful.
Yes, I hope this was interesting and helpful for all of our listeners. Thank you for doing this wonderful series. I'm honored to do it with you. Thank you.
It's fun. I need to get back to it. I got a little sidetracked, but yeah, it's super fun. So
yes. Okay.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
See everyone soon, I hope. Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.